I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
Spent that whole summer with me in my room watching movies every day.
I love the movies.
I love the movies.
I love the movies.
Welcome
To the house.
Of 1,000 movies.
Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Hamilton Book. I've been buying from Hamilton Book for many, many years, and they are a great place to find amazing deals on physical media, whether it be Blu-ray, DVD, 4K movies, CDs, or books. They've got it all. Now, I recently placed an order with Hamilton Book, so let me tell you a few things that I grabbed and some examples of what you can find on their site. I got the amazing disaster film Earthquake on Blu-ray. I also got a 3D import of the film Gravity on 3D Blu-ray. Very hard to find, but Hamilton Book had it. I got an Olive Films Blu-ray release of Hitler, The Last 10 Days with Alec Guinness as Hitler. A great movie, and you can't find the Olive Films releases anymore, but Hamilton had them. And I also got Assassination Nation and You Are Not My Mother on Blu-ray. Those were all at an incredible price. We're talking like under $10 each, and they also have new releases, boutique Blu-ray stuff at really good prices. The best part about Hamilton Book is it's flat rate shipping, whether you buy 100 movies or 5 movies, 10 books, 20 books, 2 books, it's the same price for shipping no matter what. So if you want to give them a try, head over to hamiltonbook.com/house and check out their selection today. I can't recommend them enough. I've been a buyer for many, many, many years. I appreciate their support of the podcast, so go support them and their small business. hamiltonbook.com/house. Go check them out and let me know what you think. All right, everyone, welcome back to House of 1,000 Movies. I'm your host, Jeff Rauseo, and today I've got a special guest, Edwin Wendler, composer. You've been on a ton of movies. Famous ones, X-Men, I know you mentioned, The Nice Guys, Dreamscapes is an upcoming documentary you've worked on. Lots of different credits in the industry as a composer, working on the music in the music department. So this will be really cool for me because this is an area I haven't dove deep into. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I got to say, I'm a big fan of your content. I've been watching you for about a year now, and I think you're a great explainer of things. Especially when there's some sort of panic or freak out, you seem to be sort of a calming voice. You aggregate the crazy news and you find good sources that have reliable information, and then you sort of summarize it all and you explain it really well, and I'm very thankful for that.
I appreciate it. That's always been the goal. Like that's why I started doing it. I was like the technical reviews and content for the world of physical media where I started was always above my head. So I was like, we're going to lose people if we don't, I don't want to say dumb this down, but make it easy enough for everyone to understand so that they're excited about physical.
Very
So
true. It's easy to
I
understand,
appreciate that.
and you're increasing the amount of useful information. So I very much appreciate
I'm
that.
trying. That's awesome. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. I give a quick intro, but I'd much rather hear it from the source.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm originally from Vienna, Austria, where I got my music education. So my background in music is classical music. But then once I got into film scoring, you have to be able to adapt quickly, and you have to be able to listen to a client. And if their favorite band is Nine Inch Nails, then you got to make your music kind of sound like Nine Inch Nails, even if you don't really listen to their music a lot. But so I love that aspect of it, the collaborative aspect. Even if I don't like, for instance, I'm not good doing jazz, but I have done, jazz influence type music. It's a struggle for me, but if the music gets approved, that's great. And if the client is happy, I'm happy. So that's what I do. I just write music for visual content. In the past 5 years or so, I've been working on a lot of games, which has been a lot of fun too. Because sometimes you can get very creative. The game developer or the music director will tell you, we want this music to sound like nothing else, and sometimes they actually mean that. So you get to explore and combine interesting things and weird things. So it's been fantastic. This is my dream job, so I feel very lucky.
That is what I love to hear. Anytime somebody says I'm doing my dream job, I'm like, good for you, because that should be the goal. But yeah, I noticed you've done a lot of games. Apex Legends is one that I've played, which was huge.
Mhm.
The video game industry is, I don't know if it's larger yet than movies. It might actually. It is, right?
It is. It's been for a
Yeah.
while, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's insane how big those have gotten, and
Yeah.
the budgets. I don't think people realize. Like, I- a budget for a movie like is what 200 or 300 million for a big blockbuster. Some of these games are higher than that, and they'll make
Yeah,
$1 billion in a week. It's actually an incredible industry.
it is. And also in terms of the music, I mean, there's a lot of orchestral recordings, like
Yeah.
really expensive stuff, so and also a lot of people who in films sort of lament the fact that themes have sort of gone away, the hummable melodies and stuff like that. They tend to listen to video game scores more because there's still places where you can find that sort of traditional melodic kind of writing.
Hmm.
So it's been sort of an oasis for that in a way.
That's cool. Yeah, you know what that brings up? It brings up a point, and I guess we'll transition right in. But today we had picked The Perfect Storm for our episode. You gave me a nice list of movies. I said, let's do Perfect Storm. It's local to me. It had James Horner, who we're going to talk a lot about, doing the music for it. But that was one thing I noticed on The Perfect Storm was I was watching it, and I was like, they don't make as many movies like this with that big score and that cinematic. Like, it did have great music, and I was like, damn. You watch those movies even from only 20, 25 years ago, and you're like, man, that's missing in a lot of stuff now. I wish they'd bring
Yes.
more of that back.
Yes, and the main reason for that is that directors' tastes, I think, have changed.
Mm,
So in today's filmmaking, you often see directors who don't really like traditional film music. So much to the point that even like if I see a pitch and the creatives say we don't want any traditional music, I'm like, well, that's sort of the tradition now. That has become the tradition.
yeah.
Non-traditional is normal now. It's sort of an exception, like you hear it in the the big superhero movies, big blockbusters, animated movies. You can hear big orchestral scores with themes,
Hmm.
but that has sort of taken a back seat. Whereas when Horner was at his most active, that was still the norm, and especially with Wolfgang Peterson, who's the director of Perfect Storm, he was a big fan of the big melodic traditional type of score, where you walk out of the theater humming a tune. He very much liked that, so
Hmm.
Horner was sort of the perfect match.
Yeah, and so I want to, why James Horner for you, I guess, because I know that was the immediate when we were talking about an episode. You're like, I would love to do one on one of James Horner's
Yes,
movies.
yes.
Just
Well, James Horner is my favorite film composer. Ever since I like remember watching movies, I remember listening to his music. Like one of my early memories is the movie Krull, fantasy movie.
hmm.
It was really huge at the time, and I went to see it in a theater with my parents. And afterwards, I'm with my mom, and she's singing the tune, and I'm singing the tune, and we're singing it together. It's like that fond memories of that. And then later, of course, things like Willow. And so I've been following his career, and unfortunately, he passed away in 2015. But I'm a big fan of his. I own all of his music, everything that's ever been released, and I just think he's probably the best composer when it comes to expressing emotions through music. He
Mm,
doesn't do it well. He can do it in very subtle ways, understated ways, like in the Chum Scrubber, which is probably the most unhorner sounding score of his, where he's almost unrecognizable. And then he can be very operatic, very cinematic, very epic. So there's a whole range, but I think he felt the most comfortable expressing himself in melody and harmony because his background was also in classical music. So he was very much
okay.
trained in classical music structures, having taking these building blocks of music, these ideas, these themes and motifs, and structuring them so they build a cohesive whole. So he was just excellent at doing that. And even if you're, as an audience, not aware of what's going on, subliminally you can tell there's someone building a narrative through music. And Horner was just a master of that.
Yeah, that definitely struck me while watching was just how big a part of that movie the sound was and the music
Hmm.
was and the composition. Like it was really, I mean, and he had such a great run. Looking at when you sent me the list, and I I'm not as big. I don't know all the music and the composers, but you sent me that list, and I was like, wow, this one guy did all. I mean, I could have almost done 10 episodes with some of my favorites
Yeah,
out of that
yeah.
list. He had an incredible run. And The Perfect Storm, probably one of his biggest box office movies, right?
For
It just
sure.
context for people. Perfect Storm came out in 2000. It did over $330 million at the box office, which, like, um, with the way Hollywood's going these days, they would kill for that. Just to take, but 300 million in $2,000. It was a top 10 movie of the year. Get nominated for a couple of Oscars. It was in the cast. I mean, for that time, huge names: Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, John C. Riley was up and coming at that point, but had been in a bunch of huge movies. I mean, it was a really Diane Lane was in it. I mean, it was massive. It was A list all around. You get Wolfgang Peterson on it. You get James Horner on it. Pretty A list stuff.
For sure. Yes.
So I don't know if did you when did you first see
So
the
I
movie?
first saw it in 2000 at the
Okay,
Chinese Theater in Hollywood. I mean, what better venue to
awesome.
experience a big event movie? And I was blown away by the visual effects, I gotta say,
Hmm.
because I mean, Titanic sort of pushed the envelope in terms of like showing water realistically on screen. Um, but the sea was really flat. I mean, this was not a stormy night
Right.
when that tragedy happened. But then with this movie, like ILM really stepped it up. All this moving water, flying water everywhere. Like, and I still want to like, how did they do in the green screen, because they had green screen backgrounds for many of the shots, and there was flying water everywhere in front. Like, how can you differentiate between what to keep and what to reduce from the
Mm.
green screen background to replace it with the big waves? And it seemed like seamless to me. And so I was very impressed with the movie and the score. I also ordered the soundtrack. This was my first pre-order on Amazon. So when it arrived, I'm like, oh, this is the release date, and I get to listen to this. I felt very privileged.
Mm.
And I'm also thinking, if I was a postal worker, I could have just, listened to it a few days early.
Right, right.
But yeah, I was very impressed with it. In terms of like screenwriting, I also did screenwriting classes in my preparation for hopefully at the time having a career in movies. And so, in terms of screenwriting, I could see the 3 act structure. I could pinpoint the point of no return in the
Hmm.
middle. It's very well structured. And I'd love to hear a thought on this thing, but like usually you have a main plot and then you have a subplot. And in this case, I thought the subplot was particularly strong. I'm talking about
Yeah.
the Coast Guard rescuers. It was so strong to me that as I'm seeing the movie for the first time, I'm thinking, I want to know about those guys. I want
Right.
to know more about their story. They're so noble. They're not sacrificing themselves to make money. They're sacrificing themselves to you know help others. So I thought that was particularly strong. And yeah. So what are your thoughts on the movie? When did you first see it?
Yeah. So I first saw it. I was too young when it first came out. I first saw it sometime when I was in high school, and it's been probably that long since I watched it again before I
Hmm.
watched it for this episode. So watching it then, you're you're far more immature than I am now. That person is not is not me. So I just remember watching it and being like, this is this, badass movie about fishermen out in the sea, and this is so cool. And like, obviously you don't even really, I guess that's just being a teenager, but like you don't even tie into like the emotions of like them and their families and what you have to do to provide and the sacrifices and everything. I'm just like, this is what a cool like disaster movie almost, right? Like that's what you're watching. um
And that's
but
what was being sold at the time through the
yeah.
advertising, the trailers, and yeah.
Yeah, but when you really watching it again now as somebody with like a brain, which my 15, 16-year-old self did not have, um, and having kids too, like I was like, no, with John C. Riley and his son. And I'm like, because I know how this ends.
Yeah.
And that hit me so different than it would
and
have
and his
15
final
years
line,
ago.
his final dialogue, yeah, hits
Yeah.
hard.
So that stuff kills me now. So it was
Yeah.
like, it was a lot more dramatic and emotional, and it isn't really. I mean, it's, you can call it a disaster movie, but it's not. It's not a massive, it's not Deep Impact or something. Like, it's a lot more human, and it's a true story, and it's very true to the story, which is also, the more I read about the actual events, I mean, they didn't really add characters here. These were the guys, these were the real guys, these were, the Coast Guard guys. That was a real thing that happened. Like,
Yes.
it's very serious and very accurate as Hollywood can be. And obviously these guys never came back, so you don't know the full story of what happened. So there's a little bit of unknown that they had to make up as to
Yeah.
what happened out there. But yeah, it hit me a lot harder emotionally. And I don't know if I wasn't expecting it, and then the music comes in too, and I was like, yeah, this music was just, last time I
Yeah.
watched it, this was just cool music that was, revving me up for this awesome, fishing boat going over these 50-foot waves. You're just like, this is amazing. And this time it was so much more emotional. So that was interesting for me, because I didn't expect that. I don't know, I was just like, yeah, The Perfect Storm, it's one of those Boston, movies. I've seen it before. It'll be what I'm used to. And it hit me a lot harder.
Yeah, it's interesting. The movie wasn't really marketed as like an awards movie. It was more like a summer event kind of movie, right? Even
Yeah.
though it's based on a true story and real people died. So I guess it has that in common, kind of with Titanic.
Mm,
Although I guess like the big difference is, like, one of the interesting things that I listened to Wolfgang Petersen's commentary track, and he mentions the question is, so was there a concern about, like, people when they go see this movie that they know how it ends? Because it was a new
right.
story. It actually happened in 1991. It was sort of a big story, but to his amazement, when the numbers came back, it showed that, like, I think somewhere between 92 and 95% of people had never heard of that story before.
Mm,
So they walked in blind, and there was actual suspense about whether they were going to survive or not.
that's interesting.
So I guess that was an added benefit as opposed to Titanic, where I guess
Right.
pretty much everybody knows how it ends.
Everybody knows. Yeah, I guess, I mean, for me being local, it was a pretty big story around here. I mean, everybody talks about it. My dad was just talking about it this weekend. He was like, "Oh, that was 3 weeks before our honeymoon, and we're lucky we, got to Bermuda and get out of there before the perfect storm came in." Like, everybody knows it, calls it the perfect storm around here.
Yeah,
But I could see why it's maybe not as. I mean, it wasn't a national event. It got national coverage, but it was a regional, localized thing. And at the same time, these hurricanes were hitting in other areas. So,
yes,
other areas experienced it differently. So I could see that. And I bet people were shocked,
yeah,
because oftentimes someone, and, spoilers for a 25-year-old movie here, but in Hollywood, usually somebody comes out of it,
yeah,
right? Somebody survives. And even at the end, where Mark Wahlberg's floating in the ocean, you're like, somebody's gonna come get him, right? Like, this can't. I can imagine audiences were actually shocked that, no, every one of these beloved characters we built up for the last 2 hours is gone now.
yeah,
And that's just, I mean, that's the truth. That was the harsh reality, but that must have been shocking.
yes. And in terms of the music, as you said, the emotional impact is really, maximized in the end. And the way that is accomplished in music is, and Horner talks a little bit about that in the one of the special features, is that he did his best to establish the themes, the character themes, the melodic ideas for these main characters early on in the movie. And thankfully there's this big montage, of those two boats coming home and the warm reception that they're getting, and we get to learn who these characters are.
Hmm.
So there's plenty of opportunity for music to sort of, start that process of, familiarizing the audiences with this idea, so that in the end, when those very same theme comes back, it's in a much different context. And also, like, if you'll allow me, I want to demonstrate, like, this particular
Yeah.
theme, the main theme. There's by the way, this score is very dense. There's a lot of thematic motivic material, but I just want to focus on the main theme, because I think it's an interesting showcase for what James Horner was able to do. So I'm going to play for you just a very quick piano sketch of the main theme. This is just the melody, and pay attention to the repetitions in it because I'll come back to that later. So that opening repeats again. And then this part repeats again. More repetitions. So if this is our main theme, then, like if you're a visually inclined person, I would say that this is, like you have a shot, you're filming a potted plant on a table with a wall in the background. So this theme, it would be your potted plant. And then what Horner does is he fills out the rest of the image, the table, the wall in the back, the light, what kind of light it is, how it hits the plant. That's what I would call the accompaniment. So let me play what he did with the accompaniment for this theme. And then if you analyze the score, which I won't do because it's going to be boring, but if you really pay attention over the course of the movie, these harmonies, the background, if you will, and the light on the plant keep changing. So there's different harmonies underneath. He takes little pieces of the theme and repeats those. He puts things into new context depending on what the dramatic situation requires. And as I keep saying, Horner was one of the huge masters of doing that. So you can see all these building blocks, but they're all of a sudden in a new context. And another thing I want to highlight is because I was talking about repetition. Talk about repetition. This next section is sort of adjacent to the main theme. And then he does something really clever, like he introduces this repeated thing and he plays the main theme on top an octave higher. So listen to this. This is the new idea that repeats. So you can hear there's a lot of repetition, and I've always wondered, like, unfortunately Horner isn't around anymore. We can't ask him, hey James, why did you do all these repetitions? So I can only speculate, but what I think, repetition is a sign of insistence. Like you're insisting on something, you're determined, you're maybe a little stubborn, and our main characters are kind of like that, aren't they? Because they get every chance to get out of that storm when they first learn about it, and they're like, no, we're going to push through. And I think that stubbornness is kind of reflected in this theme. And also, especially in the third part that I played, there's some dissonances in there. There's some notes that don't quite work well together. So there's this conflict. Like Horner was so smart, and I'm sure a lot of this is subconscious. Like many times when I as a composer come up with a theme, I don't have a rational explanation of why it came out that way or why it works with the images or these characters, but they just do. And in this case, I don't know how much thinking went into this, but it just works for these characters.
But yeah, you feel, yeah, I mean, you just feel that and then put it down and play it, and sometimes that probably just meshes together. But that's a
Yeah,
really interesting. They're definitely stubborn, and I I've run into these guys in real life and been around the area. I mean, yeah, they do it their way, and they're out there to make a living. This is their lifeline, and they weren't going to turn that boat around with a chance to make a really nice payday, and they were going to put it all on the line. And that conflict that you mentioned too is really interesting, because you see that with Sully and Murph on the boat, and there's that conflict
for
between the
sure.
two of
Yes.
them. And so like there, that's, see, I'm, as the layman here, I'm listening, I'm like, this is just great music, but there's that thread that runs through the whole movie, that main theme, even going up an octave there,
Hmm.
it still ties into other section. That's really cool. That's
Yeah.
really something.
So let me just quickly explain like how Horner even got into this
Yeah.
project. So the director, as you mentioned, Wolfgang Petersen, when he was still starting out his career in Germany, he used to work with two composers all the time. One of them was Klaus Staldinger, who scored The Spot and The Neverending Story. But then once he became more active in Hollywood movies, I think his mindset changed. He's like, I don't have to hire all these same people all the time. Now I have access to all these big studio projects. I want to work with my heroes. So he
Mm.
worked with Maurice Jarre, a composer hero of his, on Enemy Mine, Alan Silvestri of Back to the Future fame on Shattered, and Ennio Morricone on In the Line of Fire. All these heroes, he got to work with them. And then Horner was one of them. And Horner had been in Wolfgang Petersen's orbit for a while, mainly because of his co-producer, who had worked with him on Mighty Joe Young. Gail Katz is her name, and also Wolfgang Petersen was one of the producers on Bicentennial Man, which Chris Columbus directed, but Petersen obviously produced, and so he liked that score a lot. Plus, of course, Horner had scored, the pinnacle of the, 90s disaster movie craze, Titanic, and he
Right.
had scored Deep Impact. So it
Yeah.
was sort of a logical conclusion to hire him. There were still some questions about whether he was going to be able to, work on it because of his schedule. But once he committed, and I want to get this quote right, he said, um, "After the ship, the rocket, the comet, I'm ready for another disaster." He told he told Peterson on the phone, and he accepted the gig. And then the usual process is like the composer and the director meet, or whoever is has creative input. They talk about where the music should start and stop, what it should be doing, and then the composer goes off and works on the music. And in this case, he played pieces to Wolfgang Petersen on his piano at his home studio. And by the way, if you don't know this, I would encourage everyone to Google James Horner in quotes and the word studio. You will not believe what you will see, because most composers' studio setups they all look the same. They have a keyboard, then they have two or three monitors in front, and then a
Mm.
huge monitor on top that shows the image of whatever it is that they're scoring. In Horner's case, that setup looks completely different. Like, it's got toys and weird collectibles and interesting stuff, a lot of which generates noise. And I've always wondered, like, most composers want to work in silence because they want to concentrate on each sound that they're creating and sounds that they're combining. Horner just was constantly surrounded by buzzing sounds and clicking sounds and toys and clocks, and I don't know how he worked, but that was part of his setup. So in walks Wolfgang Petersen, and I'm thinking all these directors walk in there thinking, "What the hell did I
Right.
just get myself into?" And there's this one guy on the piano playing the music, and then they have to imagine what it's going to sound like with an orchestra. So that's always risky, I guess. But nobody works like that anymore. So today's composers very much do what we call mock-ups, which means we use samples and synths to demonstrate to the client what the music is going to sound like. Or that might even be the end stage. Like, they call it out of the box. If a movie is scored out of the box, it's just a computer, and maybe the composer might record themselves
Mm.
humming or playing an instrument, and that's going to be it. But in Horner's case, there was always that risk. The director didn't fully understand what they were going to get until they are at the scoring stage. But in all cases, it must have been like overwhelmingly positive, and in Petersen's case, that was definitely what happened. One
Yeah.
interesting thing, maybe, because uh, you know maybe you were able to hear this, but the accompaniment for the main theme is mostly fifths. If you're familiar with music, it just means that's sort of the basic building block in music. And on a guitar, like the easiest thing to play is these power chords that consist of the tonic and the fifth. And so a guitar actually plays an important electric guitar plays an important part in the score. And maybe interesting to know is that the musician was placed in front next to the conductor, which in this case was Horner, but then the amp was positioned on the back of the scoring stage under the screen where the image is projected. So it was so very much like the musicians in the orchestra could hear the guitar, which isn't always the case because it's an electric guitar. It goes into, some sort of processed sound that then can be recorded separately. So if you
Right.
combine it with other musicians, those other musicians don't normally hear it. In this case, they were able to hear it because the sound of the electric guitar filled the room that they were playing in, which is an interesting effect and sort of makes for a unique sound of this particular score.
Yeah, I did catch it at the beginning, and I don't know if it was because you had teased it beforehand and I was
Yeah,
listening. I
it,
was listening a bit for it, but I did catch it, and it
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 was
did it's different, right? I mean, that's not something that
it was sort of a big deal at the time,
yeah.
for purists, who at the time were in love with all the traditional orchestral scores. They're like, oh my god, the electric guitar! What was Horner thinking? Is he going to do like some sort of rock and roll score that traditional film music people will hate? But
Mhm.
no, no, no. He just used it as an element. And in some cases, he added layers of electric guitar. And again, this was because of Wolfgang Petersen's input. And I'm talking specifically about what I call the hunt music. It's established during the main title sequence and then comes back twice when they're actively fishing, and they're excited about it. And the music does sound like hunting music, and the reason for that is that in early 2000, Horner worked on a piece, on a concert piece commissioned by the Cleveland Orchestra called "A Forest Passage." And so he was thinking about forests and you know hunts and that sort
Mhm.
of thing, and that's where the French horns come in, playing this thing that can be traced back all the way to Beethoven, when he wrote hunting music. um, and so he kind of adapted that idea for the perfect storm because it kind of is a hunt. There's obviously
Yeah.
no forests and no foxes and no dogs, but it's a similar idea, and he adapted it by I guess adding electric guitar. And the more layers he added to that concept, the happier Wolfgang Petersen got,
Interesting.
because it was sort of the hopefully contemporary sword boat version of a hunt.
Yeah, yeah, which totally I mean, that totally makes sense, but that I mean, yeah, it's totally a hunt. It even had me thinking I always think Jaws, but it had me thinking Jaws, it's like there's that hunt. These guys
Yes,
are out there, they're hunting, and whether it's foxes or sharks or swordfish, I mean, yeah, it's a hunt and there's excitement and you feel all that. That's amplified the same way that John Williams would have done it with Jaws. It gets amplified because of that music
for sure.
and the
Yes,
score. And I appreciated that because I don't know where I land. I appreciate the new stuff that's non-traditional, although I am getting a little bit tired of like the slowed down song in every trailer that comes out recently. You know what I mean? The slowed down popular.
trailerized songs. Yes,
Yeah. So like there's that. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but also there is something about just there's iconic music that it doesn't need to be a pop song that's mixed and reverbed or whatever. Like it can just
hmm
be a great orchestral piece and you feel that in that moment specifically. I was getting that was where when I was 15 or 16 I was getting amped up. I was like, this is great. This is the thrill of the hunt. These guys are out here catching
yeah,
swordfish in the middle of the ocean. Like, this is awesome. You feel that. And then he also can hit you with the emotion and the drama, and it doesn't have to always be one note. Where I don't know, I feel like sometimes the non-traditional stuff you can get put in a box if you're using too much of like popular music or in kind of remixing that. So
yeah,
being
yeah.
able to score, from scratch is kind of nice.
Yes, and like I don't know. I mean, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Like the very presence of a symphony orchestra, makes it just big and epic. And I guess an
Yeah,
argument can be made, especially in the early parts of the movie. Maybe that wasn't necessary. For instance, when the Diane Lane character runs out, to welcome her boyfriend back. Did we really need a huge orchestra playing and a literal cymbal crash as they embrace? Maybe an argument can be made for that. But
yeah,
again, that's the influence of Wolfgang Petersen. He loved the big Hollywood sound. And while they were spotting the movie with James Horner's supervising music editor and his second music editor, they were discussing about, maybe we shouldn't put any music there. And there's several reasons for that. One of them is, you don't want to have wall to wall music because then the audience kind of zones out and the
right.
music, the music has less of an impact on the overall drama and the structure of it and the impact and the like the emotional impact. But another one is a technical one, and that is in this movie you have a lot of crashing waves, and that those sound effects are very repetitious, and they all sit in a frequency spectrum where they erase most of the orchestra. And
Mm,
I think it's most prevalent in things like the rescue sequence of the Coast Guard guys as they're like swimming around and this boat comes and rescues them. um, if you listen carefully to the score in that sequence, like most of the string section, like 80 people, you cannot hear.
yeah,
What you hear is some higher strings. You can hear snare drum, and you can hear trumpets doing sort of a distress signal, a stylized distress signal in the music. You can hear those elements, but a lot of it is just inaudible. Like you would literally have to go listen to the album to appreciate what Horner did, the intricate motions, the wave motions in the music and all that stuff. It's really difficult to hear. So at the time they were spotting the movie, they're like, maybe we should leave some spots, without music, especially the what they call the plywood sequence.
yeah,
As the windows get knocked out and they're trying to cover that area. Um, an argument was made, maybe we don't need music there, but Wolfgang Petersen's like, no, it needs to be music. It needs to have that emotional impact, and so there's just a lot of music in this movie. So
yeah,
even though the soundtrack album is very long, it still leaves out a lot of big set pieces in the movie. So and as a fan of film music, we love those expanded albums that come out by labels like La La Land and Entrada when they're like, oh, here's another 20 minutes of music, and we go nuts. In this case, there's a lot of music that was never released in album format.
yeah. No, that you make a good point. The ocean is its own orchestra in this movie. It's its own
Yeah.
beast. It's yeah, and that did in the opening scene too that you touched on. Like that did strike me right from the beginning. I was like, I guess maybe I just didn't remember, but I was like, oh, this is like big time epic. Like this is opening scene, and it definitely could have been something a little bit lighter. Like it could have gone without any music. Like, oh, they're coming home, we're meeting the characters, and
Yeah.
immediately off the bat, it's like full orchestra coming in. Yeah, the cymbals are going, everybody's playing. Like it's a really epic movie, and I think they undersold it a little bit on the marketing.
Hmm.
I do wonder. I don't know. You probably enjoy it, but I wonder audiences like expecting one thing and then getting another that was much more dramatic and epic and a lot bigger than just hey,
Yes.
big wave disaster. This isn't a hurricane movie. This is a
E-
real character study, human, like the human elements in play here. It's much more a small drama on a massive epic
exactly.
scale.
Exactly. And I would say it takes guts if you market a movie like an action movie or an event movie or a disaster movie to start basically with just characters hanging out and
Yeah.
having relationships and conflicts with each other. um
It's
like
true
uh,
because it
like the
takes like what 30, 40 minutes before
right.
they're even
Right.
out in the ocean.
So some movies do that and fail. Other movies do that and are super successful. Like
Mm,
one movie that always comes to mind in that context is the original Die Hard, because it doesn't start with an action sequence. It
right.
doesn't start with explosions or car chases. It's a guy on a plane, learning from the guy sitting next to him how to make fists with your feet. It's a little character moment that opens that movie. Um, and there are others that do that, like Jurassic Park, even though it has an opening sequence that kind of
Yeah.
shows an attack. Most of the build, like, it takes a long time until we actually see some dinosaur action.
Yeah.
And
I,
Perfect
I
Storm
think
does something similar.
I think I appreciate that more though, because if
Yeah.
you like, yeah, you know what, Jurassic Park and Jaws very similar, where they both kind of start with a bang and then go
Mm-hmm.
back to, and I guess maybe that's a Spielberg thing too. It seems to be something he does, but I appreciate that more because the payoff is worth more. And when they give you a payoff right at the beginning, it can be great, but it does kind of need to tone down. Like even a James Bond movie, like the classic is,
Yes.
we're going to open with this incredible action sequence that locks you in, and then we're going to tell you the story. That's going to tie into the story. We're going to tell you the story. We're going to get into the characters, and then we'll build to that again. And
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have like this, it's like a U shaped, where like you start really high and then you kind of come back towards the middle, more drama, more character, and then you build back up on the other end. And I think that works a lot better. I mean, I love a John Wick type movie, but
Mm-hmm.
I still like John Wick 1 better than 2, 3, and 4, because it does the same thing, because
Mm-hmm.
it builds, because you get to know him. And then the rest of them came a little cliched, where it was just action, 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 like
Right.
over the top. And I can appreciate that. Don't get me wrong. I love a movie like The Raid, which is just going to be action, but it's got to
Mm-hmm.
be real. You have to be really special, and you have to do that really, really well, or it's generic and it gets boring, because
Yeah.
yeah, I saw that in the first 10 minutes. This doesn't excite me an hour and a half in. Like, it's hard to build towards a peak. So I do like that about this movie, and I like the character development, and you get to know these guys personally, because and especially because they were real people.
Yes.
And like, that's the other thing that I appreciate, is these
Yeah,
these guys were real people.
and as you probably know, in most cases they use their actual names.
Yes.
I think the only case where they couldn't use the names was the Coast Guard people, but all the locals, the Gloucester locals,
Hmm.
those were real people, and
Oh yeah,
most
the
of them
name of
were,
the bar is the same.
yeah,
It's
and
it's a real bar.
most of them are still around when the movie was made. Most of them are still around today.
Yeah.
So that must have been a lot of pressure
No, it's
to
very
get that right.
realistic. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very, even the opening scene, which is, well, they kind of open on like, I don't even think they name it in the movie, but it's the Fisherman Memorial that's in Gloucester with all the names in the wall, and
Yes.
the statue of the fish, like, that is all real. That's not dramatized. That's there. I've
Yeah.
seen it.
Yeah.
There's been more people since the Perfect Storm who unfortunately have
Right.
been added to that.
Yeah.
It's a real part of that way of life, and it's, yeah, it feels dramatic in the context of this movie, but like, it's very real. That's it's a very different way of life, and that's the way these guys and these women live, and it's hard.
Yeah.
And I like that they showed that, and they don't just go into, all right, we're back, we got to hop out on the boat, we're gonna do 2 hours in the water, disaster movie with big waves like
Right.
that. It was nice to see the community get a shout out, and
Mm-hmm.
to show what they go through, because it's more than just the guys, it's the wives, it's the kids, it's the whole town
Mm-hmm.
gets, this is what they do there. It's very realistic. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. I mean, it's got its Hollywood things, but it's pretty true to, and I guess I was reading that the big test was, are people from the area who are real fishermen going to watch this and go, yeah, that was good. And they did give that, they said, this is, yeah, this is accurate, this is
Yeah.
pretty solid, which is always something you want to do with a true story. I don't like the true stories that are too fanatical and get too crazy. So
Right. Right. Well,
that was really cool.
according to Peterson, the film was very much embraced by the community when they had their screening there.
Yeah.
But I would imagine it must have been really tricky, especially the less information we have. The closer we get to the end of the story, the less information we have, because there was no radio contact.
Right.
And like, I wonder, like, what was an addition and what did actually happen. For instance, there's one
Yeah.
point when a shark comes on board, and I want to mention it because, like, one thing happens there in the score, that's sort of a Hornerism. If you're familiar with the movie Aliens,
Oh yeah.
in that movie, there's a lot of those stingers with high piccolo flutes playing sort of a stinger type thing. He does the exact same thing with it when the shark arrives. And all these conflicts that happen, like when Murph is overboard and starts drowning, and that's also an interesting score moment, where Horner sort of imitates Bernard Herrmann. He has these descending figures, the less life energies in Murph. The
Mm,
lower the figures go and the slower the tempo gets, which is sort of an interesting effect. um, so I wonder, like, how many of these things actually happened, and then especially
yeah.
towards the very end, like with the windows being knocked out, and all these struggles that happen on board, how much of it really happened, and how much didn't. But I do understand that you have to create a spectacle,
No, yeah.
and that movie poster was spectacular, and that first teaser trailer that they showed, you know um, caused a lot of attention. They have to satisfy that somehow on that
Yeah.
kind of a budget.
No, and I think that's where they could get away with some of that towards the end, because yeah, we truly
Yeah,
don't. I mean, by the time there's varying stories that I've read about it, and articles written about it, and some of what they showed in the movie is experience from other fishermen who have been in similar storms, and like, hey, this is what would happen. The windows would blow out. You'd have to deal with this thing, that thing. So
yeah,
they at least pulled from some of that. But yeah, the
yeah,
minute they lose communication, nobody except for those five guys knows
yeah.
what happened there. I don't think the boat's ever been found. Their
No,
beacon washed up on shore a couple months later, but they never
exactly.
found the boat. They don't. There's no real evidence. So yeah, you do have to dramatize, but I think they
Hmm.
still did it in a respectful way. It wasn't overdone. It was really, really very emotional, which I'm sure it it was on the
Yeah,
boat.
yeah,
Even George Clooney, he had a chance to get out, and I'm going down with the boat. Very this honor of, like, I'm the captain goes down with the boat. I'm not coming out of this. Those are the types of things that you could totally see happening. But yeah, very
yeah.
obviously very hard. You have to make some of that up, because that's the scary part of the true story, is like, when they lost contact, they could have been out there for another couple. They could have been a couple hours. Could have been a couple. It could have been a day. I mean, nobody knows how quickly it happened, or so.
Yeah,
It is a very sad story, but I think they played that really well, and, like, respectfully. I mean, it's not my family member, so I might feel different if it was, but I feel like it
right.
was a decent
I think
representation
so
that
too.
didn't go crazy.
I think so too. And I also want to mention, also in a music context, near the end of the movie, when we have that memorial ceremony in the church, which, by the way, is the actual church.
Oh yeah,
Um, the Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio character gives a speech, and there's no music. And I think that's a perfect spot for to not have music. It just
yeah,
it rings more true. The emotions are more raw.
yeah,
Her performance is fantastic and very heartfelt. It didn't need music, and Wolfgang Peterson obviously agreed. So this is one of the few key sequences that plays without music at all, and it
yeah.
was the right choice, I think.
I think so. I appreciated that. I was actually reading. I was diving into the IMDb trivia,
Hmm.
and the sound in that scene. Maybe I didn't catch it. I'm gonna have to go back and listen again. But I
I
guess you
didn't
can
catch that either. I know what you're referring to. Yeah,
you can hear her heartbeat actually coming through, and they could have cut that and edited it out and cleaned it
yeah,
up, but he actually really liked that it kind of connected. So it's a bit in the background, and I didn't catch it, maybe just because subconsciously it's just there. But
yeah,
yeah, if you listen, you hear her heart, and that's super powerful too, in this
yeah,
big speech at
yeah.
the end of the movie. So there's cool things they did with the sound, even outside of the music and the composition, that was pretty
Right,
impressive.
right. Now, since we're talking about the ending, shall we talk about the song, the John Mellencamp song that plays over the end credits?
Sure. Yeah.
So like, Horner was at that time kind of known for doing songs, especially after Titanic, with
Right.
Academy Award Celine Dion.
Celine Dion,
Um,
maybe the
so
biggest one ever.
right, so they had to do something similar, I guess. And the first artist that was contacted was Bruce Springsteen. He said no. So Horner's like, F that guy. No, he didn't. He didn't. He asked John Mellencamp, and Mellencamp was very happy to oblige. The idea, which came from Wolfgang Petersen and Horner, was to use the theme that I played earlier, the main theme, as the melody for the song, do some alterations, and of course, write lyrics that work with that theme. So Mellencamp did that, and the collaboration was reportedly a very happy one, with a back and forth. Ideas were exchanged, and then the actual recording was done at Mellencamp's home studio. And then some additional instruments were recorded at Taudio Scoring Stage in LA. And then, those things were combined. And I think like literally 3 weeks later, the movie came out. So,
Crazy.
I mean, post-production schedules, I guess, have been insane for quite a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody was happy. The final thing that was recorded for the score was because the song transitions into score. And that's another interesting thing about James Horner. He very much, whenever he had a chance to, he would write music for the end credits. A lot of composers are like, the audience is going to leave anyway. They're going to change channels if they watch on TV. Nobody pays attention to end credits. Just put something there from earlier. Like do a pastiche sort of best of snippets. Not Horner. He was very much for, I have to write a piece of music that summarizes all the ideas in an organic way. Put sort of Horner liked bookends, and even in this score, you will realize it starts out with guitar, sort of playing these interesting chords, and it ends the exact same way. You can hear it in a lot of Horner scores. One of my favorite examples is Willow, that starts with a children's choir and ends with a children's choir singing the exact same thing. That's another, Hornerism, if you will. And since we're speaking of Hornerisms, I have to mention the danger motif. Okay, so the danger motif basically goes da 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 da, and it's basically the through line in James Horner's career. It's everywhere. It's even, there's this thing called the James Horner Film Music Association, and in their logo, they have written down the danger motif. It's part of their logo. And of course, it shows up in this particular movie during the Coast Guard rescue sequence. But probably its grandest version can be heard in, again, Willow, where it becomes this big villain type theme, played in the trumpets and trombones, and it's really powerful statement. But it's even in things like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. It's sort of an understated version of that, played in a solo trumpet. So that's another Hornerism that it's a Horner score. Danger motif has to be there.
Yeah, he definitely has his style. I was even reading
Yeah.
that I guess there were pieces pulled right out of what Enemy at the Gates that were brought in here that he liked. So definitely has a style to him, and where it works, he
Right.
reuses pieces.
Exactly. So when you listen to some Horner interviews, he often expressed frustration that he was often under pressure to reinvent the wheel, basically. So in his view, if he scored a certain situation, a dramatic situation in a movie, and it worked really well, why not take that and adapt it and do, with minimal changes? That was his point of view. And a lot of people are like, oh, he's just recycling himself. Oh, it's lazy. Well, I don't think he was lazy. I mean, anyone who with musical knowledge, looking at the score of The Perfect Storm and its bazillion notes, will not think that James Horner was in any way, shape, or form lazy. It was part of his style, and that's what he also appreciated in other composers' music. The sort of trademarks of, this is what makes this composer, and nobody else. And so Horner very much cultivated that whenever he could.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't see that as that's no different than, it's not lazy. I mean, it's no different than Tarantino has a style of directing, and people have a style of writing. And Aaron Sorkin show or movie when you see
Yes,
one. You know what I mean? They
very
have a
much
style.
so.
They have a style. The greats have a style. They stick to it because it works. John Williams has a style. Like it works. So why mess with it? If you loved the way you scored a scene, yeah, you can make it work for another film with, like you said, minimal changes. But I appreciate that. Definitely not laziness. I think it's just it makes perfect sense. I mean, everybody
Yes,
does this in their day jobs anyway. If you do something
right,
really well, why not? You're going to
right.
repurpose it for some other task. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's just smart. And I do love the end credits in building for that versus having it be a throwaway, especially for a movie like this, because
Hmm.
I think it's the type, I never saw it in a theater, but I feel like it's the type where you do sit for a second because it's that true story. It's very sad. People who didn't know the story were likely not expecting that to happen.
Yeah.
And so you do kind of sit there. I remember doing it for American Sniper. I saw that in the movie theater. I
Mm-hmm.
did not know how that ends, and I won't spoil it, but I sat there and my wife and I, we sat there for like 2 or 3 minutes, like, whoa, because you watch this, you just don't expect that. And the credits
Wow.
are playing and there's great music over it. And it adds to the experience. So I
Yeah.
always do appreciate that very much. The movie, people need to take more time to sit with something after they watch it. Just a couple of minutes. That would be my recommendation. What any movie you see, let it end and don't jump right up out of your seat. Kind of let it stew for a second in your head and be in that moment. And
Very
so
true.
I appreciate that he does that over the end credits. It's
Uh,
smart.
Another great example, and maybe the best known example, is Schindler's List. It has such
Yeah.
a powerful ending. It connects the dots to, at the time, the present day.
Yep.
And the music is just undescribably gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
From reports at the time, there were a lot of reports that people just sat there, as
Yeah.
opposed to jumping out of their seats. They
Right.
just sat there, overwhelmed by what had just happened in this movie, and the score is definitely part of that.
Yeah. I think there should be more of that. No need to jump out of your seat and throw everything away and run to your
Yeah,
car. Sit with some, that's why I like really going to film festivals too, or something that maybe has a Q&A afterward or something, because you do sit there with the audience and people stay, um, and you get that collective feeling versus people getting up and running out of a theater in the middle of it, which can kind of ruin it if you really had this theory, if it emotionally impacted you,
yeah.
and then you see a bunch of people running out and throwing their candy away and making a bunch of noise. So I appreciate that. I love when that happens because you can tell when a movie's had that impact, and I'm sure
Hmm.
that this one had that impact on a lot of
Hmm.
people.
For sure. Oh, one thing I want to mention is that, my brain has been supercharged with some tidbits of information
Yeah.
from the James Horner Film Music Association. They're putting together a book about James Horner. It's going to be
Yeah.
called James Horner, The Emotion List. And so check out, if you're interested, jameshornerbiographybook.com. You can find more information. I'm very grateful to Jean-Baptiste Martin, who gave me access to specifically the chapter in volume 3, which is about the perfect storm. So I was able to read that and give you some, exclusive information from that.
Yeah. No, I know you had mentioned that coming in. That was awesome that they gave you access. I'm sure there's a ton of, I mean, if you're into film at all, the films that Horner worked on, I mean, there
Yes,
must be so much in this book.
I'm very thankful. So they put together a team, and my husband and I were part of that team that interviewed people that worked with Horner. Some of them directors, like we got to interview Phil Allen Robinson, um, and a lot of interesting people, musicians, music supervisors, music editors, who all worked with Horner and give insights into what kind of person he was. He was reportedly not the easiest person. Like, as I said, like in this case, the collaboration with Mellencamp was a very happy one. But I remember there was a signing with Annie Lennox, and my husband wanted to get an autograph from her, and he puts down the Apollo 13 cover, and she looks at it, and he's like, "What was it like working with Horner?" And she pauses, and then she says, "Interesting." And my husband says, okay, and we'll leave it at that. But she signed it. So, the less said about it, the better. So he was not an easy person. He could be, you know, moody and difficult to work with, but like music just oozed out of him. It was difficult, in fact, to talk to him about anything other than music. There's a very interesting anecdote the director told us where um, Horner had asked him about camera lenses, so he was interested in that. So Horner shows up at his house and he shows him some, camera lenses and explains the difference between them and stuff like that. So he was very interested in that, and it happened to be Super Bowl Sunday. So everybody, all of his friends are watching, and he asks Horner, "So do you want to stay around, watch the game?" And he had zero interest, left immediately afterwards. He was just laser focused on music, everything it had to do with music.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, when you're that genius level at something, right? It's just,
Yeah,
it's what you are, consumes you. Living in a world without music playing all the time was probably pretty boring. I'm sure he had to have stuff going, and
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I understand that. That was his focus. I think that there's a lot of people. I talked about this on an episode we did on Pulp Fiction, where it's like,
Hmm.
or people would say like, oh, Tarantino's a demanding director, or Scorsese, demanding and being hard to work with. I think it's just, that means they challenge themselves and they challenge other
For
people to
sure.
raise to that standard. And if you're not one of those people who likes to be challenged, you'll probably hate it. And there's probably some people who love it and thrive in that environment. So I never give people too bad a rap when they hear, oh, they were difficult to work with. All I think is like, that person was probably extremely driven and just hyper focused and at that level above
Yes,
everybody else, and
yes.
expected everyone else to get there. And that's hard. I mean, yeah, that can make people be difficult to work with, but it's by no fault of their own.
Yeah, yeah. But often it is about, like, are you vibing with that person? Do you want to push yourself the
Right.
same way that they are pushing themselves? And in my limited experience on video games, I had an interesting experience where I was part of a composing team, and some of the other composers requested to not be paired with a specific client because they thought that he was too demanding,
Mm.
asked for too many rewrites, too many revisions, pushed them too hard, and they felt like it was much more work than they were getting paid. But I jumped at that. I really loved working with the guy, because I think I understood where he came from. He wanted to
Mm.
push the envelope, wanted to do something interesting, something really memorable, in the context of video games, and I was totally for that.
Yeah, it's all about, if you can see someone's true intentions. Yeah, it's usually
Hmm.
not, I'm out to be a pain in the ass and I'm out to be
Exactly.
hard to
Yeah.
work with. It's not that. You have to see through that, and but yeah, I mean, if you don't vibe with them, I can understand that too.
Hmm.
But it takes a special type of person, and yeah, James Horner. I'm glad we did this, because not a name, surprisingly, not a name that like I knew and I could name like all these movies. But God, when you
Hmm.
sent me that list, I was like, we got to dive in. I need to know more about this guy, because the resume is unbelievable. So
It is.
very
Yeah.
much appreciate you taking the time. I'm glad we picked the perfect storm, because it had a nice local connection for me, and I'm glad I could revisit it and remember it's not a disaster movie, and it's actually this really nice, powerful, emotional, human drama,
Yeah.
which was good to be reminded of. So don't watch the teaser trailer and then expect a certain thing, because it's not what you're going to get necessarily. Um, but what a great movie. I'm glad we could revisit it.
I'm very
Um,
glad too. I'm very thankful.
yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch, and it's it's definitely one I'll go back to now. In the visual, yeah, I do have to. The visual effects stand up.
Yeah.
Next year will be its 25th year anniversary, and some of those visual effects from the late 90s and early 2000s, as they were kind of getting their feet wet with a lot of CGI and stuff, a
Yeah.
lot of them are not great. This one holds up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive what they were able to do. It's well worth a watch. If you guys are listening, watching, and you haven't seen it, I recommend it.
For sure.
Well, Edwin, thank you so much. Before we go,
Thank you, Jeff.
where can people find you? What are you up to? Anything you want to plug?
I'm easy to find. Edwin Wendler, Wendler. on all the socials. I have a link tree. So
We love
yeah,
Linktree.
yeah, and as you mentioned, that documentary Dreamscapes should be coming out soon. It was an interesting project because the director very much wanted a traditional kind of score with big memorable melodies, and we were able to record a large orchestra and 3 choirs actually
Wow.
in Vienna, Austria at the Synchronstage. So it was a big project, and Kate Winslet is doing the voiceover narration. Uh, Extremely lucky to get her for this project, which is a small indie,
Yeah,
Austrian movie.
that's awesome.
So I feel very thankful and happy about that particular score.
Awesome. Well, yeah, this best of luck with all of that and with everything in the future, and hopefully everything keeps going well for you out in the world of film and music. And I'm excited to see what's next. So we'll
Best of luck to you too. I can't imagine
thank
what
you.
the pressure is to be creating content
It,
consistently
oh,
and
it's
of hopefully high quality. I know you work at it very hard, and it's very much appreciated and noticed.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's not as hard as some of the real work out there.
True.
I'm thankful. I'm thankful that it's something I get to do.
Yeah.
It's time. It's just time and effort more than, I'm not on the Coast Guard team going out there and trying to save people in the middle of a hurricane. So I'm thankful for that and for those guys and girls. But luckily, I just have to make content.
For sure.
But it
yeah.
is. I appreciate the support. Yeah, it's a
Of
lot
course.
of work.
And by the way, I love your sign off. It's very heartwarming. The stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you. I know some people, I started doing that when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
Like truthfully saying,
Yeah.
stay safe out there. It's crazy out there, and we didn't know what was going to happen.
And you kept it going because you
I
never
kept
know
it
what's going to happen,
because,
right?
honestly, yeah, it's just kind of a nice thing to say. I hope everyone who watches and listens stays safe and stays healthy. I've had actually
Yeah.
people tell me like, you don't need to do that anymore. It's over. And I'm like, yeah, but does that mean we don't want people like, you don't want people to be healthy anymore? I'm just going to keep putting it out there. It's good vibes. So
It is.
thank you. All right. Well, this is really cool. Thank you so much. I learned a ton.
Thank
I
you.
love that you brought your own, the analysis and everything with the piano. That was super cool. This is a great episode. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Hey there, movie buff. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of House of 1,000 Movies. I hope you had as much fun listening as I did discussing some of my favorite films. Don't forget, if you're into video podcasts, you can head over to the YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. If you're already on YouTube, it's right there, so why not hit it? And for our audio listeners, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you've been enjoying the show, why not show me some love by leaving a 5-star review? It really helps me out, and it lets me know that I'm hitting the mark. And hey, before you go, a quick shout out to our sponsors. By supporting them, you're not just supporting the show, but also the content you love. Thanks again for joining me in the House of 1,000 Movies. Until next time, keep watching, keep listening, and keep watching great movies. Take care, everyone.